Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Until yesterday afternoon, the Minister for Zero Carbon Buildings, Active Travel and Tenants' Rights has been very coy about this emergency legislation. I've written to him. I know that Mercedes Villalba, who is sadly unable to be here today, who has courageously led Parliament in this campaign for a meaningful rent freeze, has written to him seeking clarity, but he refused to give it. What we do know is that the Scottish Association of Landlords met with the government just last week, and they could tell their members after that meeting, and let me quote them, "It is expected that landlords will still be permitted to serve tenants with notice to end the tenancy as normal. If the tenant doesn't vacate during the notice period, landlords can then apply to the tribunal for an eviction order as normal." They go on. If the eviction ban was to be extended beyond the 31st of March 2023, then each individual eviction order would be subject to a maximum delay of 6 months. E.g., an eviction order issued in December 2022 could be enforced in June 2023 at the latest, or on the 1st of April 2023 if the ban isn't extended. And the bill confirms this to be true. So this is an eviction ban, but the best that can be said of it, it is that it is a temporary, it is a deficient, it is a semi-eviction ban. A ban in which tenants can still be served with a notice of eviction, which does not make it any harder for landlords to evict tenants, which does not strengthen tenants' rights, which simply pauses the eviction for a time-limited period. And let me turn to the rent freeze. This is what the Scottish Association of Landlords said about that. Rent increase notices issued before the 6th of September are expected to be enforceable as normal. It is possible that safeguards may be put in place to allow rent increases in exceptional cases where a landlord can demonstrate that without one they will suffer, in their words, extreme financial hardship. They go on, the rent freeze will only apply to mid-tenancy rent increases and will not affect a landlord's ability to apply a rent increase between tenancies. And the bill confirms that this is true. So this is not only a long way from a universal freeze on rents, there is a real danger that the government's promise of a rent freeze, this most significant announcement, in the words of the First Minister, will melt under the heat of fact. I'll give way.
Minister.
I'm grateful to Richard Leonard for giving way. I've laid out exactly why this needs to be a balanced package, and I've been saying since the member's colleague moved an amendment back in June that a universal blanket approach would almost certainly fail the test of proportionality. So I'm a little bit confused why the member is using his speech simply to read out what I've already said is the government position in an ever more angry tone of voice.
Richard Leonard, I can give you the time back.
Well, I will choose to speak in whichever tone I wish, Mr Harvie, and I will include the content that I wish to include in my speech, and I won't be dictated to by you, whether you're on the front bench or not. And I'm bound to say to the Scottish Association of Landlords, if you are concerned that the proposals will cause extreme financial hardship for your members, what about the extreme financial hardship your members are imposing on tenants? And if landlords are complaining that their altruism is being tested, that a temporary rent freeze will drive them out of business, and so the supply of homes for rent in Scotland will dry up, I say to them, if this really is about altruism, why not sell your private rental properties to the public sector so they can become socially rented homes and the tenants can stay? What we truly need is a rebalancing of power between landlord and tenant. At the moment, if a tenant considers their rent to be unfair, the onus is on them. Firstly, to know that there is such a thing as a rent officer. Secondly, to know where to find a rent officer. Thirdly, to contact that rent officer and get them to undertake an assessment. And fourthly, to then negotiate the implementation of that fair rent with the landlord themselves. So I say to the Minister for Tenants' Rights, why shouldn't the burden of proof be placed on the landlord to justify any rent rise rather than on the tenant to win a case against it? A constituent of mine, Ashley, contacted me a day or so after the First Minister's announcement to say that her letting agency had sent her a contract which puts up her rent from £475 to £530 a month. Her rent doesn't include her bills, like gas and electricity. The mortgage on the property is paid off. In other words, there is no justification for this huge rise whatsoever. I've got a letter here. She told me it's hard for everyone right now. My gas is up, my electric's up. What a time to pick to up my rent as well. Ashley has not signed the contract, but she doesn't know if the rent freeze will apply to her, or whether, at the end of this month, she will have to start stumping up this 11.5% hike. Ashley said to me, I personally don't think it's fair that only some rents will be frozen. She is right, and Ashley speaks for thousands of young people like her. So a temporary freeze will not help. If it is designed to take the heat out of this effective grassroots campaign that has got us to where we are today, it will not work. We need proper rent controls. That's what this Parliament must legislate for. Instead of short-term emergency legislation, we need long-term transformational change to tackle the housing crisis, to tackle unaffordability, overcrowding and homelessness, and to take on the rogue landlords and properly protect tenants. Because without tackling insecurity and the soaring cost of housing, we cannot begin to tackle inequality. And without tackling inequality and injustices in housing, we will never tackle it in wider society. We must be on the side of the tenant, not the landlord. And today we must deliver with action and not just with words.
Thank you very much, Mr Leonard.